Several months ago, the pastor called and asked me to have a sermon. What he said was, show the people how to use Bible Hub in their Bible study. I had a lot of objections. He listened politely, but he obviously didn't pay attention to them. One of my objections was the Bible Hub is a tool, and I don't come to church to hear about kitchen tools and farm tools and garage tools, so I wasn't sure what to do. And worse, when I asked him, okay, so we're going to do this as a tool, but I do use Bible Hub. I use it almost every day, and sometimes many times in a day. So when I asked him what the topic is that we're going to use this tool, he said, vanity. Vanity. Ta-da! So, but he didn't mean the kind of piece of furniture that a girl will sit and do her hair and makeup at. He didn't mean vanity like ego or arrogance, and he didn't mean pride. So what did he mean? That was a good question. Because he gave, well, then I said, what texts do we use for this? And he gave two, one of which was in Psalms, and the other of which was in Ecclesiastes. Now, Ecclesiastes is all about vanity. And I don't know about you, but that book was written for young people. That book was written for youth. It's been a long time since I've seen youth. So I wasn't sure what in the world we were supposed to do. Besides, the Bible was not written in English. It never was or has been or will be written in English. It's translated into English. That's a big difference, because when you go from one language to another, you not only have to know the language you're going from, but you have to know the language you're going to. And we didn't even have English in the world for a good 1,000 years when it was beginning, and then basically 1,500 years before English even started, any English that we would recognize today. So the meaning of words that we read in our Bibles is, who knows? Except there is a way. And I think we should ask the Lord to help us know that way. Heavenly Father, we are going to look at vanity today. We're going to look at vanity through Bible Hub. May we each get a blessing. Amen. When the pastor asked for this, he said that to call Ken, because what the pastor wanted was something that was live through the internet. To have live through the internet, I'm totally at the mercy of people who know how to do these things. And Ken has spent several hours with me from the beginning to the end. I said, I want a real mouse. I want a real keyboard. I don't do well quick at laptops. That's too slow for me when I'm studying. And for sure, it's too slow for church. So I thought we should look and see what the word vanity means. So this is what he's given us. If you were to use, whoops, now I don't know what I did, but let's see if we can go to, no, this is fine. Okay. We go. I don't care what order we go in. All right, vanity. And whether it's uppercase or lower, it doesn't make a bit of difference. But it should be consistent. All right, so what this is a concordance. And the concordance will tell us where, this is just a fancy index to the Bible. And it will tell us where the word vanity appears in the scripture, and then it will tell us the Hebrew, Greek, whatever word that it came from. The pastor didn't give us the word, anything from Kings, so we're not going to Kings or Job. We are going to Psalms. We're going to Psalm 39. And all we have to do is to just click that, and there we have the verse. This is a Psalm of David, and he says, "Behold, thou hast made my days as an handbreadth." In other words, they're this long. "Mine age is as nothing before thee. Verily, every man at his best state is altogether vanity." Well, the people I know I wouldn't consider vanity, so there's got to be some kind of meaning. So if we want to get out of that, that's simple. We're not going anyplace else in Psalms, so we need to go to another page. And on this page, we can see we have another 20 verses, more in Psalms and now Proverbs. And here we get to Ecclesiastes. And notice Ecclesiastes, this is the text the pastor gave. Ecclesiastes 1, verse 2, has this number. And if we look through here, you can see that that number is consistent. And if we look through the rest of Ecclesiastes, they're all the same. So we may as well click on this first one. Right here, that's the number. Now here is the Hebrew word that's behind our English word vanity. I can't pronounce it, not going to try. But it says emptiness, figuratively something transitory. That's the key. If a thing is transitory, it's moving. It's not just in one place. A vanity, where a girl does her morning beautification, is in one place. A person who has an ego too big to fit in a room, that's usually taking up the place. So this word is translated as altogether as vain and vanity, but it means something transitory, and it says unsatisfactory. Now notice that it also says from this other number up here. So we'll click on that. We want to know what that number refers to. That says it means to be vain in act, what a person does, word, what a person says, or expectation. Specifically, to lead astray. Oh, so vanity is something transitory, but that has the potential to lead astray. That's a whole different meaning, isn't it? And it's a very thoughtful type of meaning. We can get rid of that with less nervousness. Anyway, and so forth. Now, if I were home, I just go to Google or Bing or whatever I'm using and put in another and search for something else. But what I want is to go to Ecclesiastes. Actually, I would rather go to Psalms. We need to go back there. So anytime you find a box, in a little arrow, it usually going someplace. So let's go to Psalms. Now we don't want Psalms 1, we want back at Psalm 39 where we were. But we're going to go a different place. Well, we're going to go that same place. But now we're in Bible Hub. Again, it set this up, so all I have to do is a few clicks. But we don't want this whole psalm. We want just 39 verse 5. So we're going to look for this thing called parallel. And now we have some verses. 39:1, no, we want 39:5. And when we get to 39:5, we see that there's a version, and let's see what it says. Everyone is but a breath. Now see, we read vanity before. The New Living Translation says, at best, each of us is but a breath. Here's the King James. Verily, every man at his best state is altogether vanity. So we can see that the word breath is substituted in some recognized, appreciated scriptures, even though it's not vanity. Well, look at this. The New King James says vapor. Vapor is like if we live in Montana on a cold day, we understand about vapor. And the New American Standard says breath. So there we have it. Many different words, all supposedly meaning the same thing. But what did we read that the word vanity means? It means something that's moving, something that's transient, with the potential to not be good. So now we're going to go to Ecclesiastes, and let's find Ecclesiastes, and let's see who's writing this, because if the person isn't very credible, those of you who know me, I'm a church member here like all the rest of you. I'm not from out of anywhere else. I'm just here. And the pastor asked me to do this simply because he knows that I use Bible Hub. So let's look at this. Ecclesiastes 1:1. The words of the teacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem, King David's son, ruled in Jerusalem. Now let's look at verse 12, or let's look at 16. This says of this person, see the name, there's no name in this book that says who wrote it. It just says it's the son of King David. So this person, the author said, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who's ruled over Jerusalem before me. I've experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Here's the same concept. And down in the King James, I communed with my own heart, saying, lo, I am come to great estate, and I have gotten more wisdom than all they that have been before me in Jerusalem. Yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. My point, this person was wise, this person was a son of King David, and I think most of us would say that all adds up to Solomon. But just in case there's anybody in this room who has a question, I'd like us to go to 1 Kings. This is one of the books in the prophets. Let's go to 1 Kings. We want 1 Kings chapter 4. And now we want to go to verses 20 and onward. And we want to go there because this is a big chunk and I want us to get something out of this. Okay, we can read, let's read from the New International Version. And I don't want to go verse by verse. I want to get this in my head. So I click the chapter. So here, 20. Solomon's daily provisions. I want us to understand what this means. The people of Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They ate, they drank, they were happy, and Solomon ruled over them all, and those countries brought tribute and were Solomon's subjects all his life. Solomon's daily provisions were 30 cores, whatever a core is, of the finest flour and 60 cores of meal. And now, down at the bottom of the New New International Version, which is what I'm using, down at the bottom in the footnotes, it says probably about 5.5 tons. Do you know how much 5.5 tons is? Well, I got to thinking of these railroad cars that transport grain. We live in grain country. And they take about 100 or 100 up to 115 tons of wheat in one railroad car. So that means that if there's 5 tons, 5 into 100 goes 20 times, you could get 20 days supply out of one railroad car. That's a huge amount of food. This is one day. Then it says, we're going to go back and read the rest of this because I want us to be duly impressed. All right, 10 heads of stall-fed cattle every day. 20 pasture-fed cattle every day. 100 sheep and goats every day. Deer, gazelles, roebuck, and choice fowl, for he ruled over all the kingdoms, da-da-da. That's a lot of food. During his lifetime, Judah and Israel lived in safety, everyone under his own vine. It's an expression, they lived in their own homes. But we're not done. Solomon had 4,000 stalls for chariot horses, and he had 12,000 horses. And that made me say, what's the largest horse farm in the United States? How many horses do they have? I don't know these things. And that's what I use the internet for. It's my library, and it's right there at my fingertips, and I'm constantly going at it because I spend several hours a day in what I do at the computer. It's just more nervousy up here. So, the largest ranch, horse ranch in the United States is the King Ranch in Texas. They have 200 horses. Solomon, 12,000. Well, what this tells us is that the person who is speaking ought to know something. But what we need to remember is, in the Jewish Bible, there are 3 sections. We don't do this in our Christian Bibles. Our Christian Bibles start with Moses and those 5 books, and then we have history, and then we have prophets, and we have poetry, and we think of it differently. But the Jews think of the Old Testament in 3 sections: the law, the prophets, and the writings. Psalms and Ecclesiastes both come out of the writings. Psalms, the law, this is God talking to people. Do it. Do it and you live. Don't do it and you're not going to live well. Physically, mentally, socially, spiritually. It's all there in those 5 books. Then you have the prophets. Those books the prophets basically are saying, who else has the great God of the universe talking to them? Treasure it. In other words, the law is do it. The prophets are treasure it. But the writings are think about it. So with Psalms, this is not God talking. This is people talking to God. It's people talking about God. Songs, like we have in our hymnal. And I've been very appreciative of the Sabbath school superintendent who's had us singing at Sabbath school many of the Psalms that are in our own hymnal. So think about it. The book of Ecclesiastes is an essay. You remember from high school English what an essay is? State your point, support your point, restate it, summarize it. Some like to say, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Doesn't matter what it is, it's 3 sections. And the book of Ecclesiastes has 3 sections. We're going to look at that right now. In fact, we are going to look, I don't want this one, I don't want the live streaming, I need to go back to Bible Hub, okay?
You probably want to open a new tab.
Oh, and I don't run mine this way, so I don't know how do I get back to search. Because I don't, thanks. Okay. Now, if you put Bible Hub into this, which I'm not going to bother, oh, I better. The pastor wanted us to learn how to do it. Bible Hub is like going in the front door of your own house. How many times have you seen a great house? Think of Kensington Palace. Think of Buckingham Palace. Think of anything, any house over several $100,000. Who that lives there goes in the front door? Nobody goes in their front door except guests, and maybe not they. Why? Because we have another door that's easier to get in and out of. If it's a back door, it's out that way. If we have a place to drive a vehicle in, maybe it's a garage, maybe it's only a carport, but if it's a carport, then we probably go in the side door. But if it's a garage, we have a way, or maybe it's a really great house and you have an underneath parking place that's totally secured within your house. So we are not going to go into there, but I suppose we should show it just to fulfill the requirement. Look at this. Now, I don't know about you, but that looks like a bunch of stuff that I don't want to bother with. Why? Because it's just too much. Because I'm in a hurry. I want to get found what I want. And so I'm going to go in the side door. I'm going to go to Ecclesiastes. And I'm going to go to Ecclesiastes 2, which I could go this way, but I could also go this way, which is much faster, which is what I do at home. So here now we have what the King James says, vanity of vanities. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Now, all is a very inclusive word. So maybe we need some caveats for that, and we'll find them. What does the New King James say? Basically the same thing. The New American Standard says futility. A futility thing, that's a thing that's useless. And sure enough, there are versions of the Bible that say useless. Everything is useless. There it is. Useless. Life is useless. All useless. Or pointless. Says absolutely pointless. Everything is pointless. So if everything is pointless, what's the point of keeping on reading? There's not, because it doesn't really mean that. We already looked to see what vanity means, didn't we? So we know that vanity is something that's transitory, can lead us astray, and I don't think any of us use the word transitory. I think we use the word brief or temporary. Here today, gone tomorrow, whatever it is. And so that's one of those words is what we're going to use. And we're going to look through here now. Let's look at the chapter. And because I think the words are easiest to read in the New Living Translation, I'm using that throughout. The first and second chapters of Ecclesiastes are basically defining what he means by everything, and what the writer, who I take as but I want it from this translation. Why is it not doing that? This is the only translation. Let's see. Up here at the Bible, the New Living Translation. What do I need to do?
You might do the parallel.
Oh, it's okay now. No, because parallel is when we get all those different versions. But I just didn't scroll down enough, I guess. Whatever. Anyway, so the point is here in chapters 1 and 2, the first thing he talks about is that as he looks out at the real world, everything's going in a cycle. The earth, the sun, the water, rivers, you can read that on the screen or in your own Bibles. So after realizing that, he says, it's foolish. What he's going to do, though, is make a decision. he is either going to, he's going to see what can go on as far as for wisdom or foolishness. That's what this first chapter is about. The second chapter, he says, is he decided to look for pleasure. He found all the good things in life, laughter, and decided that was something that could lead astray, foolishness. He tried to find meaning by building huge homes and vineyards and reservoirs and gardens and parks and slaves and herds and flocks and great sums of silver and gold and kings and provinces, and yes, eventually we get to it, concubines. Everything a man could want. So anything he wanted, he took. And he said, though, he made an observation. The wise can see, verse 14, the wise can see where they're going, but fools walk in the dark. But I saw the wise and the fools share the same fate. They all die. And that's the first thing that contrasts with the brevity. In other words, these things that he calls vanities are brief things. What lasts? Death, dying. So there's a lot of emotion in this book. One of the first ones that he mentions is that he came to hate life. To hate life because everything was so troubling. And furthermore, when you work and you give up in despair and question the value of all the hard work, because what are you going to get for it after you die? Some people work wisely with knowledge and skill, but they have to leave the fruit of their efforts to someone who hasn't worked for it. That didn't seem right to Solomon or to whoever wrote this. What do people get in this life for hard work and anxiety? Even at night, their minds can't rest. So he decided, verse 21, that where am I at 24? Yes, thanks. So he decided there was nothing better than to enjoy food and to drink and to find satisfaction in work. And look at this. Here's the foolish things in life that come, or the brief things in life, but food he's listing as something that's not transitory, something that lasts. Why? Because every bite that you put in today lasts. And why is death? Because that's so final. So, verse 25, who can eat or enjoy anything apart from the hand of God, he asks. Anything apart from him. God gives wisdom, knowledge, and joy. Now we're going to go to chapter 3. We're not studying Ecclesiastes. We're trying to find different ways to use Bible Hub that you can go home and use, I hope, for reading. Because I get my most good out of the Bible by just reading it, not studying it. There's no place in the Bible that I know of that says to study the Bible, but there are many places that talk about reading the scriptures. And in chapter 3, the big point is that the issue of time for some things, that there's a season for these things. And so why is this important? Because, verse 11, God has made everything beautiful in its own time, but people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. So he concluded, there is nothing better than to be happy and enjoy ourselves. Do you see why we had the closing song? I'm not sure why I sent the right song to Joyce and the wrong song to Rhonda. Rhonda did as she was asked, and that's why I had to tell her again today. I made the mistake. There's joy. I'm wanting to give the message of Ecclesiastes. It's a lot about joy and happiness. And that people should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labors. Verse 18 makes an interesting observation. Anybody that's taken a biology class up in grade school, college, graduate biology class, you know that humans are said to be like animals. And I hear a lot of Christians object to that. But Solomon agrees. Listen to what he says. I thought about the human condition, how God proves to people that they are like animals. They share the same fate. Both breathe and both must die. So don't get on your high horse and say, we are different. Just act different and recognize that you breathe and you die, and be gracious as you deal with the people in your world. And here's another thing. Both go to the same place. They came from dust and they go to dust. So what's the point? Verse 22, I saw, he says, there's nothing better for people than to be happy in their work. So when you go to work, how many days a week? 6, exactly. Whether it's home or out, it's 6 days of work. Be happy in that. Chapter 4. In chapter 4, this is an interesting thing. He talks about several things that are not good. One, verse 4, is envy of the neighbors. You know, the neighbors move. So whatever you do to keep up with one neighbor, you might have to do something else to keep up with another. He also says and feels badly toward the person who's all alone, has no child, no sibling, who works hard to gain as much wealth as possible, and then says, who am I working for? Why am I giving up so much pleasure now? Think of Solomon. Think of this. This is not God talking. This is Solomon saying about how he looks at life. The word meaningless there is the word vanity in the King James. And finally, he says here in verse 13, it's better to be a wise youth than a foolish king who refuses all advice. I wish all the gray hairs would remember that. I wish all the non-gray hairs would remember that. Wisdom is good at any age, but a foolish old person, that's sad. But when you're young, you may be popular, but you need to remember that popularity only lasts as long as you're doing whatever it is that made you popular. As soon as somebody else comes along, then they become popular. Let's look at 5. Chapters 5 and 6 also kind of go together. There are a lot of things in Ecclesiastes that have nothing to do with the topic that the pastor asked us to consider. But I do think it's important that we look in verse 8. Don't be surprised if you see a poor person being oppressed. That's sad. But he also says those who love money will never have enough. So somewhere we have to realize enough is enough. But what stays, if wealth is temporary, what stays, verse 18, I've noticed one thing at least. It's good for people to eat and drink and enjoy their work. This is about happiness. Do it every day, 6 days a week at least. Be happy. 6. He goes back to talking about death, but this time from a different point of view. A person might have 100 children, might live to be very old, but if he doesn't get any satisfaction in life, it would have been better for him to have been born dead. his birth would have been meaningless. Oh, vanity, his birth would have been temporary. We wouldn't wish that on anybody. But do you understand the importance to him of being happy at every age of life, at every step in life? I think that that is something that we need to consider. Now, I've been going to the top. You can do that, but this is much faster. That's what I do at home. All right, now we begin 7, 8, 9, and 10, those chapters which kind of go together. And we don't have time to read all these things, but these are just wise sayings. It's truth as Solomon, sees it. Then he says, it's back to this death issue in verse 15. I've seen everything in this brief life, including the death of good young people and the long life of wicked people. So don't be too good or too wise. Why destroy yourself? Did you know the Bible said that? Believe it. On the other hand, don't be too wicked either. Don't be a fool. Why die before your time? Is he telling you to be what? Wise. To avoid both extremes. Does that make sense? So when you feel like you're being a workaholic, remember Solomon said, avoid the extremes. Don't do too much of any one thing. Now here we go to verse 26. I discovered that a seductive woman is a trap more bitter than death. There are, at the top of Bible Hub, all of these abbreviations. Those are Bibles. Now we have here, those are not abbreviations, but short forms of different things. I don't pay a lot of attention to them. I use the parallel ones, of course. We started with that. But this is about the commentaries. So I'm going to go to a commentary on verse 26. Oh, that's what I didn't do. I need to click on 26. Oh, too close. Okay. 26. Well, we have to get out of that. Now we want to go to 26 and go to the commentary on verse 26. I want you to be suitably horrified. 26. We want to use, interesting, this is coming up differently than mine does. Well, it's the pulpit commentary. A commentary that I want that does not say anything that agrees with the rest of the Bible. This is not functioning like mine does, and so I can't show you that. But I rarely use the commentaries, but I do occasionally. And the commentary that, basically, the commentary that I wanted to use, here we go. One practical result of this quest that needs to be mentioned, though it comes from a suddenness which is startling, I find more bitter than death the woman. Of the woman came the beginning of sin, says this person. It may be thought that he's referring here to the strange woman of Proverbs, but he concludes he has a very low opinion of them, and so forth. It is not surprising that his impression of the female sex should be unfavorable, and so forth and so on. Well, all of that does not match with the rest of Scripture. And so I want to show you that a different one on a different verse, verse 28, this one is right here at the beginning. The disparaging estimate of females here expressed is common in countries where polygamy is practiced. Now that's a new thought, isn't it? It is credible enough that Solomon with his 1,000 wives did not find a good one among them, but there are plenty of comments about a good wife. So now let's turn to Ecclesiastes 8. This is still part of this little section here. And for people who don't know how, we want the New Living Translation of Ecclesiastes 8. And we want verse 5. Those who obey him will not, this is about the king. Obey the king, since you told the Lord you would. Don't try to avoid doing your duty. Don't stand with those who plot evil. For the king can do whatever he wants. His command is backed by great power. Those who obey him will not be punished. Those who are wise will find a time and a way to do what is right. See, Solomon did know that. You and I can know this too. Those who are wise will find a time and a way to do what's right. For there is a time and a way for everything, even when a person is in trouble. I think that's very good. Then he talks in verses 9 and onward. He talks about people who are really wicked, and yet they're often seen at church. You know this kind. But then there's something he says that we need to think about. Here it says, I know, even though a person sins 100 times and still lives a long time, I know those who fear God will be better off. The wicked will not prosper, for those who don't fear God. Now, you and I know people who do very bad things, and yet they seem to prosper. But think about this. Think of Abel. Abel, the word Abel, the name of Abel, the second son, that word is vanity. In other words, the same word that's translated Abel in Genesis is translated vanity in the book of Ecclesiastes. So what is he saying? He's saying Abel's life was just a breath. It was short, it was quick, it was transitory. So when he says the wicked don't prosper, for they don't fear God, and that those who do fear God will be better off, he's taking a long view, isn't he? He's not just saying, he's not looking at just immediate things. Taking the long view. Ecclesiastes 9. His point in verse 5 is that the living know that they're going to die. The dead don't know anything. So therefore, what do you expect he's going to say? Verse 7, go ahead. Eat your food with joy. Drink your wine with a happy heart. God approves of this. This is what I like. Wear fine clothes with a splash of cologne. Okay, live happily with a woman you love through all the days, all the short, all the brief days of your life. The wife God gives you is your reward for all your earthly toil. All you husbands, remember that, please. Next chapter, which is 10. This begins with more of those little truths, but it's 3 that I want to notice. You can identify fools by the way they walk down the street. Now, I cannot do that altogether. I'm not sure I can do it at all. But during the 10 years that I taught GED out at the prison, several times the men would say this. And they would say this with respect. You know, our little college here has a very strong program on criminal justice. And so once a year, those students come to the prison, and the guys that were in my class said they could tell from the way those students walked down the halls that they could tell who they would see in there. The first time, as inmates with them. The first time that was said, I smiled and listened and went on. I'd never heard such a thing. And the next several times it was said, I began to pay attention until finally I asked. And they told me how they could tell that by the way a person walked, whether that person thought they were better than everybody else or haughty or all different kinds of things. Chapter 11. We'll go to verse 8 because chapters 11 and 12 go together. This is the last. Verse 8 says, when people live to be very old, let them rejoice in every day of life. And I can assure you that I do, and I'm sure that others do too. But let them also remember there will be many dark days. Yes, everything still to come is transitory. It's brief. I think of my mother and my father who passed away in my home. You know, they lived good lives. They were strong physically and mentally and spiritually. And those last hours were hard, but they were hours. They weren't days and weeks and months. They weren't years. And I was grateful for that. And when I read this, I hadn't noticed this before. In fact, I hadn't read the book of Ecclesiastes for many years because it's been a long time since I've been a youth. Who is a youth? The United Nations identifies youth as those between the ages of I didn't think I'd have to look this, but somewhere it says here, 15 to 24. Now, teenage years, you only have 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 7 years to be a teenager. To make the most of it means, according to Solomon, recordarse a tu Creador en los días de tu juventud. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. I recommend it. It's the first verse I learned. And I learned it and remembered it in Spanish long before I learned it in English. 7 times this particular version says to remember. We're going to be done. I'm not going to read them all. But I want us to notice. Remember before you become fearful of falling. Remember before your hair turns white like an almond tree and you drag along without energy like a dying grasshopper. And there's places in the Bible that mention mandrakes, and we live in an age of the little blue pill, and now here he mentions the caperberry. My point is Solomon's. There's nothing new under the sun. Everything is just reinvented, different names, different sources, but it's all the same. Remember him before you near the grave. I hope it's not everlasting for any of us. But remember the Creator now while you're young. Keep this in mind. The teacher was considered wise. The words of the wise are like cattle prods, but my child, let me give you some further advice. You see, he's writing this as an older man, but he's writing it to youth. And if you think about it, every person in this room today is one day younger than you will be tomorrow, Lord willing. That doesn't make us youth, but it makes us more youthful today. And maybe we can take some of these things to heart, regardless of how old we are. Fear God and keep its commands, for this is everyone's duty. God will judge us for everything we do, including every secret thing, whether good or bad. If you got anything out of this from the computer, please thank Ken. He has spent hours on it. Thank you, Ken. Let's thank the Lord. Heavenly Father, I thank thee that there are people in this congregation who will help those of us who need help. and I thank thee.